Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this session of the Global Women in AI Summit. And let me introduce a little bit about myself before I pass the baton to the esteemed panel of experts we have today. I'm Swathi Young, Chief Technology Officer of Integrity Management Services. We are a healthcare services and solutions company located just outside Washington, D.C. And here I'm leading cutting-edge technology solutions and AI services for the U.S. government located in Washington, D.C. I have over 22 years of technology experience, so worked on all technology stacks, and most recently started working on R and Python and machine learning solutions, like I mentioned, to our US federal government clients here in Washington, D.C. I also run a community of 2,000 plus members in Washington, D.C., where I host events for a curated, very small audience, specifically using cutting edge technologies to increase performance of organizations. And I am so glad and a proud member of Women in AI ambassador for Washington, D.C., and have been working with Women in AI for the last 2 years, where our goal is to increase diversity in AI. And we have members from over 113 countries. And today, the Women in AI Global Summit started in Australia and is following the sun. And here we are for the first session in the United States. So welcome, everybody. And here we go to our expert panelists. So starting off, Paula, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Swathi. Hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here today. My name is Paula Bejarano. I lead the scouting efforts for Goodyear, the tire company, surprisingly enough. We are based in San Francisco. I scout for startups and technology based on autonomous vehicles and autonomous, anything that goes around it. I have a background in engineering. I started my career as a rocket scientist at NASA, and after a couple turns in life, found myself at Tesla, where I fell in love with innovation, sustainability, and self-driving technology. I author a book, Autonomous Vehicles and Emerging Business Models. And then after that, I also advise a couple of startups here, as well as OEM and industry experts. So I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. Great to have you here. Over to you, Becky.
Hi, everyone. I'm Becky, Soltanian. I'm in AI business like everybody else. I was tech lead manager at Byton, my previous place. I started with a sensor company, Velodyne. That's the beginning of my journey in autonomous driving. And then different startups, ups and downs. And I love autonomous driving. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Becky. Over to you, Gwen.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gwynn Sturdevant. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you very much, Swathi, for organizing it, and for all the other women in AI organizers. I know it takes a lot of work to pull one of these conferences off. So I did my PhD at the University of Auckland with Professor Thomas Lumley. I also worked with Ross Ihaka. My background is largely in R, and I run Our Ladies DC, which I think has over 5,000 members. I'm also an international keynote speaker, and I'm so excited to be here and to listen. So thank you.
Thanks, Gwen. Amazing. So we'll go right on top to Susanna.
Everyone, I am from California. I am my background is in psychology, so I'm a cognitive science, human-computer interaction. I'm right now currently an AI ethics researcher. I started my journey at Intel, where I worked on human emotion modeling and behavior modeling. And I did a couple of projects that involved autonomous vehicles and behavior modeling inside autonomous vehicles. But that's relatively very small contribution compared to all of the other panelists here. But from working there and also working at Amazon and working with other companies, I started to feel like there is such a need for ethics in AI. So I have moved my focus towards that, and also towards the focus of agency of passengers within the car companies and within autonomous vehicle space. So my research has now been focused on that, and I am also an advisor at iWow.ai, and I recently worked on their Shaping AI Systems dataset report. Also, I'm contributing my time to many organizations where I think I could make a difference.
Awesome. Thank you for participating today. Over to you, Saina.
Everybody, my name is Saina Ramyar. I'm a software engineer at Leidos, and I'm basically a software developer for project run by Federal Highway Administration called Karma, which is an open source platform for connected and automated vehicles. I've been there for about a year, and before that, I was a PhD student and researcher at North Carolina A&T State University, working on motion planning for autonomous vehicles. I'm very excited to be here, and I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Saina. And over to you, Radhika.
Hi, everybody. This is Radhika Arora. I'm the director of autonomous driving working for Semiconductor. I'm part of the intelligence sensing group, and what that entails is essentially providing sensing solutions to a vast plethora of OEMs in the automotive space, as well as long range of startups that are coming into the self-driving market. I work on defining next generation sensor technology. Feel hugely privileged to be sharing the stage with the fellow panelists here, and thank you, Swathi, for organizing it. I look forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. And interestingly, in the chat, we have people from Mexico and Nepal, Mexico City, Germany, and Boston joining us. So I look forward to hearing from you all. So without further ado, I will move on to the question session. So we all are hearing a lot about level 5 automation. Of course, there are discussions, deliberations, and debates about how long will it take for self-driving car adoption. So explain a little bit about what does the level 5 automation mean in the context of self-driving car adoption. Let me start off with you, Becky.
Yeah, great question. Level of autonomy, I mean, it's based on what's people, everybody has a different interpretation of that, but it starts from level 0, which is a human completely in charge of the car. Then it goes to level 5 with limited assistance, like lane assistant and blind spot assistant and all of these that nowadays you can see in majority of the cars. Then level 2 is a little bit more control, like lane change mechanism, and for example, object detection, object tracking as part of that, but not completely. And still, the human are in the loop, and they should be completely in charge of the car. Then it comes to the level 3. It's more automated. The car can make very simple maneuver, even make the decision, and bypassing some, let's say, object or something like that. Still, humans are involved heavily. Then level 4 is less human, more automated, and level 5, the definition goes to complete robot agent taking over, and there is no human involved, or if there is, very, very limited occasions. Right now, the level that we are seeing in the road, everybody working, secretively or openly on level 3 plus. What we can see is something between level 2 and 3, that some of the companies, the cars are out there. You can even purchase them and try them. But majority of the car companies or OEMs, what they deliver right now is up to level 2, except 1 or 2 companies, startups, that they're working on level 3 as well. So I can see that people are working on it. We are close, but when it will come, it's not today, it's not tomorrow. Maybe some people said 10 years, maybe 15 years, maybe less. It depends on how things are going forward, because it depends on many, many factors.
Thank you, Becky. And over to you, Radhika. I know you've been working a lot in this sector. And I know there have been claims on and off Twitter by Tesla and other companies about level 5. So what have you to say about level 5 automation and how the self-driving adoption depends on that?
Sure. So I'll actually break it down into 3 different facets. So there's a technology angle to it about whether technically we can reach level 5. There is a business adoption aspect to it, and there's a regulation aspect to it, all of which culminates into user acceptability and adoption. So looking at it from a technology standpoint, we've made leaps and bounds of progress in the last few years, and it's a complex problem to solve. I'd say it's as complex as putting a person up on the moon. But that too can be divided into whether you're looking at rural areas, you're looking at urban areas. Urban areas, of course, are harder to map. There are a lot of variability in building systems that can support city driving. If you compare that to what the rural environment or lesser crowded cities offer, it's a lot more achievable task. And we've seen that with the rollouts that companies like Waymo have had in the Phoenix area as an example. The second aspect, if you look at regulations, honestly, I don't think they exist today. We saw some rollouts from the Secretary of Transportation earlier in the year, but there was really nothing that stated that automotive companies have to comply with, have to follow in order to get their cars out on the road. So just to give an example, when you look at the federal motor vehicles rules, there are about 1,000 rules in that article. And on an average, 2/3 have not been updated for the last 20 years. So there is massive work that needs to happen on the regulation front, as well as on the technology front, despite the advancement that's already being made. Then there's the whole business aspect piece of it. That's when we get into the rural-urban models. Ride sharing is a big piece of this. It's going to find a lot more acceptability and a lot more usage models in urban areas, not in rural areas. So where would corporations be investing in? But technically, it contradicts. So I don't have a single answer to give you. I think I'd invest a lot in the Tesla stock if I could give you exactly how many years it's going to take to roll out. But what I can comment on is that there's a lot of work that has to happen. It's an iterative process between technology companies as well as regulatory authorities to get those cars out on the road.
Thank you, Radhika. Yes, the eternal question was betting on how long adoption, but you mentioned an interesting point. I'm sitting close to Washington, D.C., where regulations haven't changed and regulators are still skeptical what to do with social media disinformation. So autonomous vehicles are far in the horizon. So you mentioned another interesting point, the dissimilarities between urban and rural areas. And I want to say, I take it one step further and say there is dissimilarities between certain zip codes in the urban areas. So my next question goes to Paula. Does the adoption of self-driving cars perpetuate social inequality? We know there are regions with low bandwidth. There is questions about affordability. Not everybody today can afford an electric car, for example. So does that question arise? Paula?
Yeah, I think we're looking at it actually the wrong way. Autonomous vehicles are not going to be individually owned, at least for the next 10 or 20 years. It's a $250,000 car full of sensors. So it's going to be a fleet base. So you're going to see Cruise, Waymo, even Tesla having a ride sharing approach. So you're talking about fleets, you're talking about trucks, you're talking about shuttles. So when you think about that, you're democratizing the technology. So wherever an Uber driver today doesn't want to drive, outside the Bay Area 2 hours, because first, it's not economical, and second, there might be areas, the socioeconomic areas that are lower than downtown San Francisco, and a robot doesn't care. A robot doesn't care if you're in the rich or the poor areas of the country. So I think it would have the opposite effect. I think at first, obviously, the more privileged will have access to this technology at first. But if you find a way where the Department of Transportation, the technology companies can work together, then you can actually extend and expand the accessibility to those vehicles for public transport, for mass transport, and make it a multi-modal means of transportation. So first you take, a shuttle goes to the outskirts of town, does its daily route, it goes to the train, and then a person could go into the city. So you have to think about it like the overall picture, not just autonomous vehicles being part of like a person's assets that sits in a driveway. That's not going to happen. So I think for me, eventually it would have a positive impact on society.
It's amazing. I think you highlighted a positive impact, and too often we think in a negative direction. And I can't wait for the day where I can get rid of my insurance and the city taxes I'm paying on my car. So Gwen, what do you have to add to this discussion if self-driving cars perpetuate inequalities in society?
Well, I think initially Paula's probably right that they will be kind of owned by groups of people or by Waymo and all these other places. But I do think that eventually, and well, there are people I think that can't afford 250,000 cars. I think $250,000 cars, they exist, I think, right now. And I do think that when level 5 rolls out, it may perhaps, I think it is very likely that people who are in low social and economic areas will probably not be able to afford them, very likely. And I think the thing that worries me is when they are rolled out a little bit more, that perhaps non-autonomous vehicles won't be sold in certain areas. So that's another thing that I think we need to think about. We need to think about, autonomous vehicles being used for public transport. So instead of buses and all these things, and I think public transport is really, really important. And I think that having autonomous vehicles in public transport is an important skill set. And I also think it's important that the people that perhaps used to drive buses and trains and so on and so forth are upskilled with some kind of education, so that they can, are encouraged to succeed. Now, I do have questions about the pandemia right now, because I know that driving it's really decreased recently in the past couple of years, and I think that all of the stuff that we're talking about is for me it seems kind of, I think it's difficult to predict the future for after this happens. Who knows? I think the cost of car insurance right now has gone down so much because no one's really driving. I also think it's really helpful to think about, certainly in levels 4 and 5 or stages 4 and 5 of autonomous driving, that it will be so helpful for people who perhaps have visual impairments and are unable, or seizures, or right now are not able to drive cars at all. So I think this is, it's a really important thing to think about. I think it's really exciting, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think the advantage is definitely for the disabled and even the elderly, because too often the elderly's reaction to all the traffic on the road is unpredictable. So yes, absolutely. So I know there's a popular
sorry,
question.
could I make a quick comment on this?
Sure, Radhika, go ahead.
Yes, I was just recently reading something where they were talking about the road being an equalizer today. Like, it doesn't see whether it's a rich person driving a car or a more economically challenged person driving a car. It's an equalizer. But once you get into the ride-sharing model, and it's a paid service essentially, so you can actually pay for more premium paths. Like, there'll be faster routes from getting from A to B. So if you're paying more, you take the faster route. Or if there is car-to-car communication, then the person again who has the premium service relative to a standard service might have right of way. So I think there is going to be some discrepancy there, and there is going to be some level of economic discrimination. Again, comes down to the business models.
Yeah, no, good point, because even here, I don't know how it's in California, but those living in the metro area of Washington, D.C., we take the toll road of up to $40 to $50 in the morning. And if you want to pay $100, you can reach earlier into the city compared to sitting in traffic, right? So that's at a small scale, but I think that's an analogy in my head. So good point. Thank you, Radhika. So I see on the chat that the trolley problem has come up. Obviously, I had it on my list, but I want to bump it up because of its popularity. So we love, in the context of self-driving cars, we love to discuss the trolley problem. I think before this, we never discussed this. So obviously, the trolley problem is the ethical dilemma of a level 5 self-driving cars, whether to save the passengers or save the pedestrian on the road. So Susanna, obviously you have done a lot of work in the ethics and you're a researcher in AI ethics. I want to start off with the trolley problem question. Like you can see in the chat, it's highly popular. So what are your thoughts and viewpoints about this?
Well, I know there's a lot of discussions on the original trolley problem, and now the trolley problem has now been included in the AV vehicles question, and to me, it's more than the ethical issues of whether to kill one person or to kill 3 people. People always talk about that. But I think that is, if you look at from the human perspective, it's always been a reaction. You know, when you are faced with a situation like that, you react. But when a car is faced with a situation like that, it's a decision. So that's where the morality comes into question. Now the car is deciding instead of the human reacting to a situation. So now if you look from that context, morality decisions are now being made by AI in every other sphere of our life. And we haven't really discussed that in the same way as we have picked apart this trolley problem for ages now. We have just accepted the morality decisions of facial recognition, the morality decisions of algorithms in the criminal justice system, or in predictive policing. We haven't questioned them as much as we question this. To me, I think we need to focus the direction more on what is the ethical implications of the inequalities in making these kind of decisions, especially when your algorithms are trained on data sets that are biased, which we know has been true for all AI systems. What about that when it comes to AV vehicles? Nobody has seemed to address that issue. Like if you are I see the AV vehicles in my area is like frequently being trained on. It's like, that's all I see from my window. I can even see a Waymo pass by within the last 20 minutes. It's going round and round. It is collecting really good data on my neighborhood, which is a rich neighborhood. For all whether I am rich or not, I am living in a rich neighborhood, and it's going to collect data based on that. But is this the same when it is going to the neighborhoods in San Jose, or maybe the neighborhoods in Oakland, or somewhere on any of those low-income neighborhoods? What about the kind of data it is collecting? And then what is the moral decisions it's going to make based on that? I think that is where the trolley problem needs to go, instead of just focusing simply on the utilitarian dilemma of whether to kill one person or whether to kill 3 people or whether you should kill yourself. I think that is too simplistic. We need to move past that.
I was saying I was reading an interesting anecdote that the European laws about certain things about pedestrian crossing compared to the US are different. And also the way the bumpers are on cars. In Europe, it's banned to have such bumpers because when they hit pedestrians or bicyclists, it harms them more. But in the US, we don't have such laws. So there are already certain ethical decisions around regulations that are very different from place to place. But it's interesting, again, the trolley problem we love to discuss and debate. So real quick to you, Becky, what are your viewpoints on this subject?
So I completely agree with what Susanna explained. But before going to, to answer this question, I have to bring up another aspect of autonomous driving, at where exactly we are going to launch a level 5, if it's ever, we achieve that. Is it going to ordinary roads in my neighborhood? There are lots of problems with that, or it's going to be in more controlled environment. Majority of the OEMs, traditional OEMs, are in favor of having in a controlled environment when everything are connected to everything else and everybody is talking to everyone else. That's very, very, controlled environment for autonomous driving for level 5, which is something like similar to smart cities that nowadays in East Coast there is one of them, or in China particularly a couple of them. So as long as the human are inside the loop, if we get back to the question, it's exactly what Susanna explained, that it's the reaction. If the car shouldn't make any decision, if there is something, then the driver will jump in and make the, react to the situation and make the decision based on its interest, her or his interest. But when it comes to the robots, we can, write it like any other. I mean, as a scientist, I can write a cost function for that, put couple of or several variables, like, for example, life expectancy, life productivity, or even wealth, or everything, and then run that on an environment, on a simulation, and then make my program do the decision. But whether this is correct or not, when it comes to the human life, we have a rule or a fact that overrule whatever my simulation will, dictate, and that's the right to live. We cannot decide, for example, if there is a toddler versus a senior citizen, which one should stay alive. They both equally, and we cannot do something like that. So we will get back to my, beginning, that where we are going to put that robot to perform in a very controlled environment. We are trying to avoid all of this, tricky situation for the safety of human inside the car, and whoever is outside should be very controlled, that we never, hopefully, will face something, to deal with something like that. So my question is, we should launch level 5 in a very controlled environment. And it's not just the trolley. There are, for example, some use case, corner cases, I can say, like left turn. When I heard that from some of the, in a job interview, that how I'm going to train my model to make the left turn when there is no time and the road is not clear. And my answer was, I'm not going to train anything. The car should stop. When it's clear, then it makes the move, or try to figure out, make all of them to right turn. In order, it will take longer, but it will be safer for the people around and inside the car. So these corner cases should be addressed in other ways. We are not going in the same way. Humans shouldn't jump in front of another driver, a human driver. The robocar is absolutely are not going to do like something like that. So we'll get back to, again, it should be level 5. To me and many other peoples in traditional OEMs, they are in favor of, in a very controlled environment, like a smart cities. Hopefully I answered the questions.
Sure, Becky, thank you so much. And it's funny you said the left turn, right? So that is one place where human judgment is so important, because there are some drivers who take the risk and do that left turn in a fraction of few seconds, and there's some drivers who are more cautious, and I've seen like getting honked at when you make the left turn when the other car is coming past you. So that's a very good example, I think. So now, Saina, I've not forgotten you. You've done some good work with Leidos. I know with respect to closely with Federal Highway Administration, and you're an autonomous vehicle software engineer. So one question with regarding to legal policy and regulation implications, especially with respect to insurance and liabilities, right? So what have you to say about those areas? Since I know I'm putting you on the spot because you work closely with Federal Highway Administration here in Washington, D.C. Saina.
Sure. So first of all, I don't think I can speak on behalf of the federal government, but just being in DC and close to all these regulators.
There's a fine print and a disclaimer, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But the thing is, yes, as I think Paula mentioned earlier, or was it Radhika? I'm not sure. So currently there is no specific regulation in terms of autonomous vehicles, but I know that people are trying and being active to change that. There are like different aspects to that. You need to educate the regulators about the potentials and the shortcomings of autonomous vehicles. You need to have the proper conditions. Aside from the autonomous vehicle itself, there needs to be specific infrastructure if they are going to be launched into the cities. So I know that people are trying actively to improve the condition and add some, basically educate the regulators so that they can have better understanding and come up with better laws. But of course, right now there are none. And then so aside from the legal part, I think there are other aspects to autonomous vehicles in a society. As I mentioned, there is the infrastructure that needs to be improved. I'm working on a connected vehicle platform, so we need, for example, connected traffic lights. We need connected signs and even connected roads. We need to have also separate, hopefully separate roads, such as the high occupancy lane or a toll road that is going to be less congested, and then the vehicles can move more easily and not disturb the human-driven vehicles, especially in the beginning, that there is going to be mixed traffic. And then there is the insurance situation. Who is going to be insuring these vehicles? Who is going to be liable if any accidents happen? And those are also the kinds of conditions that need, first of all, need education, and then they need more discussions to be fully figured out. I know that right now, I think the companies that develop these vehicles are insuring their vehicles, but that's not going to be the case when there are a lot more autonomous vehicles on the road. So that situation needs to be figured out, and I think developing standards and safety, safety specifications can help with that. So the same as a driver's license for human drivers, there should be a license, for example, or a certification for an autonomous vehicle that can, certify its safety to some extent, and then people can have can use those more comfortably.
Thank you, Saina. Over to you, Paula. I know we did speak about the impact to insurance companies as well as liability. So I know with your work at Tesla, has there been any conversations around policy and regulation impact of autonomous vehicles?
I don't know about the Tesla part, but just from overall, from the research that I did for my book, for insurance, for instance, because as I mentioned before, the autonomous vehicles, the first business models would be on a fleet base rather than ownership base. Individually, you will have usage-based insurance. So rather than insuring, the individual itself, companies, OEMs, or transportation network companies will be insuring the vehicle. And then it comes to a place where if we have these perfect robots that are driving, because the whole point of having autonomous vehicles is that you are going to reduce the incidents, right? People are going to like human lives will be spared. That's the whole point of having autonomous driving in the roads, right? So insurance companies will see their premiums lowering. Does that mean like they're going to make less revenue because you will have less car accidents? This is like eventually, right, like the utopia of autonomous driving. So then they have to think about, okay, is this really something that we want to be involved with? So companies like Waymo and Cruise are starting to think, do we insure our own vehicles? And then in terms of liability, as I spoke to a lot of OEM executives, if in the case, say today, there's a car crash of an autonomous driving, is the company the responsible company? Is it the OEM or is it the tier one who provided a specific ADAS component? Like level 2 kind of automation we're talking about. And talking from the tier ones, we say the minute that the component is the LiDAR or the radar or the computer vision camera, the moment that that's integrated into the vehicle, it becomes the responsibility of the OEM. So therefore, you have to think about liability in the aspect of like, it's not the human driver anymore. It's most likely the manufacturer of that vehicle specifically. And coming back to policy, I think that we have to look at the autonomous driving industry or verticals as how the airline industry and the aviation came about in the 1920s, in the 1930s, where, there were car crashes, there was no inspections, there was nothing in place for these humongous pieces of engineering just flying with people in them, right? Like, how scary could that be when you're, in the 1920s? But the fact that the industry, the airlines requested to the government to be regulated, it gives the public opinion a peace of mind of saying, okay, this is okay to fly in these things. And eventually, we have this huge industry and you and I fly all the time. So I think that's where we will be eventually with autonomous vehicles, but the government needs to be involved as well.
Good point, because I didn't think about the analogy to airlines, right? So yeah, and they do have autonomous capability right now, flying an airplane with so many more lives at stake. So good point. Thank you, Paula. And we will wrap up with one question before we go to audience questions, because I see our audience is pretty active today, which is awesome. So one question I had was, what are some of the first, second, and third degree societal impacts? And we have spoken a little bit about impacts to insurance industries, but also I'm sure there's impacts to urban spaces. So I'll go to you, Radhika, and then to you, Gwen.
Yeah, I think it's going to change a lot of facets and basically life as we know it. We've heard about how urban areas are going to free up. Parking lots are not going to be of paramount importance anymore. That's going to give way to having more greener spaces, having more affordable housing in big cities. I'm sure San Francisco could do with that, or Manhattan for that matter. But there are also other peripheral markets or areas that could get impacted as well, like the hotel and motel industry. So today, if you're taking a road trip, you're not going to be driving 20 hours straight. You break your journey, you get into a hotel. All of that can just go out. That can be replaced with, okay, you don't need to stop and get into a motel. You can just use your car to rest, etc. Somebody on the panel mentioned about more independent living, or living for the elderly, and care for the elderly is going to change a lot as well. And even again, I'm going to bring in rural areas where you have the elderly who have more access to medical services if robo-taxis become more pervasive. There's a company actually based in Santa Clara, California. It's called RoboMart, and what the business model that they're going to be coming up with is that you don't need to go inside an actual store. They actually have merchandise that's coming to the house where you can look at the merchandise online or whatever other method you have. And then the other big aspect of it is going to be things like gas stations. So there's going to be a major push towards electrification that's going to either reduce the dependence on gas stations, or you're going to have it outside of the major city hubs. And the other big one that we haven't really addressed so far is on autonomous trucks. Frankly, from my perspective, I think that's going to see a much faster uptake relative to even the robo-taxi model. And the reason for that is that 90% of driving for autonomous trucks is on the highways. And highways is an easier path to model as opposed to really crowded cities. And with that, it's going to change a lot of the connectivity issues as well that's seen in rural areas, because a majority of that is rural driving across the highway. So there are going to be more cell towers. And the minute you have more cell towers, then that fans out into development around those areas as well.
I like the RoboMart. Now I can do window shopping from the windows of my house.
That one really struck a chord for me as well.
Yeah. So Gwen, I know that you travel a lot and you live just outside DC. So how do you think the urban spaces will change? I think it's a continuation of the same question. Hopefully we get back all the parking spaces.
Well, I agree with almost everything you said. So I wanted to thank you with the very thorough introduction to your question. A few things I didn't think that I would add to that is that it seems like driving will one day be obsolete. Someday in the future, no one will really know how to drive, I think. The other
worry about my 4-year-old getting into an accident 15 years from now.
Right, certainly. And the other thing that I think perhaps we haven't talked about yet is that there's a number of people who really enjoy driving, and I'm not one of them. But I think we'll probably see places where people can go and drive some kind of Lamborghini, or you could rent some very fancy car and drive if you want to. And I suspect that will probably increase. I also think that in the future, I would expect that the population will be more spread out. We'll probably have less population density because everyone can kind of relax and perhaps work in their car or while they drive, or while they commute to work. So those are the big things that I'm thinking of. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit about legal and policy regulations now that I have the floor. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, if that's okay. One thing that I read about that I thought was very fascinating was that, we would expect for speed limits to be enforced kind of judiciously if we have self-driving cars, but there are a few instances, like edge cases, that might require speeding, perhaps if you're giving birth, or perhaps if you're an obstetrician that's going to the hospital, or perhaps something like that. And so I think we need to think about ways that we can automate or override these systems. I also think about cars being hacked and being taken over by people, and what to do with all this data that the car will probably be collecting on us and also on pedestrians that are walking around. So I think there's a lot of privacy concerns that we haven't discussed, and then there's this stage 3 conditional automation that where the legal implications and the policy implications, I don't think it's quite clear on which point does the driver become responsible or does the car become responsible. So anyway, thank you.
A lot of food for thought. Go ahead, Susanna.
I just wanted to add a few things to that. Some of the industries that I think will get hit will be the traveling industry as well as the healthcare industry. Healthcare insurances have the possibility of going down because, the number of accidents and debilitating injuries will be reduced. So that could have an impact, positive impact, but it might have a negative impact on the traveling industry itself, especially short-term flights. Airline industries will get a hit because then you pretty much sleep in your next city or 300 miles from here to San Diego. You don't need to take a flight for that. And that could also impact the hotel industry, which is where you take an overnight stay because you don't want to drive anymore. So all those things that we haven't foreseen would actually take, it will have both a positive and a negative impact. And those industries will have to go through a major change trying to accommodate this. And another one could be, I know Radhika already mentioned the gas stations, but I'm thinking about the power contribution with regards to gasoline-rich countries that they have now over the other countries. That petroleum, I know, industry and the lobbying power they have, the political power, all that will have a major shift. And that shift may be positive or might be negative also. We don't know that. And so that this has implications that are far reaching than what we have imagined.
Thank you, Susanna. And now I'll go over, since we have quite a few questions from audience. This is an interesting question, and I would like Becky, you to weigh in, since Ushni Sengupta says, since we are at the Women in AI conference, we would like to ask some gender-related questions. In most countries, more men have the privilege of driving than women. So would more men benefit from autonomous vehicles than women?
I like the question related to the gender. So to be honest, I don't think so. It will be, if let's say autonomous vehicles available, it will be available for everybody. And because maybe women are not that much into driving, it will be even used by women more than men, male counterparts. But this is, I think it's probably autonomous driving will try to sort of equal the inequality between the two gender in this aspect. That's, for being capable of driving in some countries or in some areas, that the gender is really a great factor. For example, the parents should buy a car for their daughter or for their son. And in most cases, the son get the privilege of having that. And then the sister, the siblings, female siblings just left out. This is unfortunately a reality of the life. But when it comes to the autonomous vehicles, then the parents cannot say, for example, I'm not paying for your fleet, or I'm not paying for your drive because you want to go to school with autonomous driving. So this will be sort of like using the public transportation. You cannot see the public transportation inequality in public transportation. Everybody can buy a ticket and ride the metro or the bus or anything. I haven't noticed, at least hopefully this is the case in many areas. So I will think that will equal or smooth out the problem of gender inequality. However, this will brings another thing. I'm happy that they, she or he mentioned this problem. Majority of OEMs are male dominated, and the way that they're addressing many of the problems, if we turn back to that turn left, this is the topic for male. I'm pretty sure all the ladies, majority of us, we will wait till the road is clear and then we will make the turn. And if it's really dangerous, I myself make my way, take my time and, use another safer, route to get to the destination instead of jumping in front of other cars. And I believe this inequality impacts the way that's how this car is going to be, the autonomous vehicles are going to be launched, and probably there will be some corner cases that's create some catastrophe if it's not addressed properly with the safety. So just to conclude, I believe that autonomous driving of self-driver cars are going to help gender inequality. It will smooth it out. Nobody can, prevent a female from driving. If you have the money, then you will get probably not as much as I'm hoping, because still male, men are more privileged. They earn more, maybe still in some environments, some areas, because of the inequality distribution of the wealth, female will be left out. But in majority of the large cities or in, let's say, middle class level, it will be sort of, we won't face it, hopefully. I cannot predict it, but hopefully we won't face it.
That's a very positive point, Becky. Thank you. Here's a question for you, Saina. I think this is related to the driving. This is related to, paraphrase it, this is related to the driving patterns of males versus females. Like Becky mentioned, males can drive dangerously and recklessly. So when we write our machine learning models, are we taking into account the unbiased data irrespective of the irrespective of the driving patterns, whether it's male or female, or also based on the physical features of a male with the design of the car itself?
I see. Yeah, so basically it is very important, and everyone should try to do that, should try to get as unbiased as possible with their training data. And whether it is male or female, or whether it is like different ethnicities or different like countries, they should have as as comprehensive a data possible to use to train their self-driving car. And also, I agree with Becky. It's also important that the teams that are designing these algorithms are diverse enough that they can, include every different point of view, and not just focus on one specific, idea about how the car should be driving. And and it's the same for driving, and it's also the same for detection, because the perception of the vehicle needs data to be able to detect what is the person, a pedestrian or another driver. That data should also be very comprehensive and inclusive of all these different minorities, and like basically diverse enough.
Here,
I just have something quick to add to that, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely, go ahead.
I'll try to be as brief as possible, but for me, the term unbiased data, I just have big concerns with it. I took a wonderful course with Heather Krause, who has a website called We All Count. And she gave this terrific example that I'd just like to share briefly, and say we have 3 classes, one with 1 student, another with 3 students, and another with 5 students. So what's the average number of students in those 3 classes? Well, it's 3, right? But that's from the teacher's perspective. So if what's the average number of students per class from the student's perspective? Well, we have 1 student in 1 class. Then we have 3 students that are all in 3 classes. So that's 1 + 3 is 9. Plus we have 5 students in 5 classes. 5 students in 1 class. So that's 5 times 5 is 25, right? So we add that together and we have 35. And then we divide that by 1 + 3 + 5, that's 9. So that's approximately 4 students in a class. So even something as simple as the mean has a perspective to it, right? And it's so embedded in our society that we don't even think about it. So the idea that data is unbiased is something that, I feel, quite strongly about, that I think that ingrained in every single data set and every single measure that we have is a perspective. And that, I think, is one of the problems that we have in addressing AI. I'm just going to go briefly and just share a story about, a talk that I went to. And it was this person who works at the Department of Defense. He's the AI co-chair for the Department of Defense. And I went to the talk thinking that I would get this very interesting perspective on AI and how it's being addressed at the Department of Defense. I couldn't believe it. The man put up a picture of a squirrel and said, AI works like brains and everyone knows this is a squirrel. So it's very important, I think, that we listen to everyone. He was seen as the expert, and I couldn't believe the questions afterwards. No one brought that up, that this is a squirrel is not at all how AI works. And so I think it's really, really important that we consider those kinds of things and consider those kinds of questions. Of course, I was, my mother-in-law had died the day prior to the talk, but I went anyway. And I had to put my hand up at the end and say, you know, if you put up a picture of a squirrel in front of a 3-year-old, they might not know what it is, you know, and they also have brains. You know, in addition, I don't know how many languages are spoken in this room, but they might not even call it a squirrel. So it's just these kind of really things that I think we need to think carefully about. So anyway, thank you again for listening. I really appreciate it. And Saina, I just wanted to add that.
Oh, the last story was a good one. Too often we listen to experts, and I think raising that flag was an important lesson. But real quick, we only have 4 minutes, and I want to wrap up so that we give an opportunity to the next session. I have an interesting question from Pippa here, and Susanna, real quick, if you can wrap in 2 minutes so that I get a round robin from everybody. Is there data to support the claim that different driving habits are related to gender, not culture?
I think so. I do believe that is an aspect that's been completely ignored by the AV industry, that the kind of data that they are collecting, even the driving habits, everything is also related to culture, and culture data is now being completely absent in most of the data sets. And what I think Gwen already said that, I mean, different languages call things by different ways, and even the pronunciation in natural language processing, everything is different when you see it from a cultural perspective. Words have a different meaning in each culture, and they have a different emotional context in each culture. So even driving in different cultures is seen here in America, we see it as an example of freedom, but in other areas it may not be. So it's just like it serves a utilitarian purpose. So I don't think we have included that, but the data does exist. Just because it's not included doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does exist, and we need to go look for it.
Susanna, and the last question, if I can say in 30 seconds, sorry to be brief, take your swag at it, and I'll start with Radhika. How long do you think it would take for general adoption of self-driving vehicles?
Since it's like it takes 16 years to get a human driver on the road. So that's my reference point.
That was a good one.
That's a good one. No reference to horses. Okay, I'll go to you, Becky.
I completely agree with Radhika. I believe it will take time. It's not happening tonight. It's not happening tomorrow. It's probably minimum 13 to 15 years, we will see that adoption. But the good news is, I mean, let's look positive, that many people talking to it and many people interested, and they show that it's important for the society, particularly with the pandemic. If we had the autonomous driving, it would be way easier to, for the food deliveries and all these grocery deliveries. At the beginning, it was a struggle. I don't know how many of you faced that, but honestly, some of those companies, they struggled how to deliver because nobody wants to risk their life for, a bunch of carrots or celeries to be delivered to someone like me. So I believe it's coming gradually. So if we look at it.
Awesome, thanks. Paula, any guesses?
There are self-driving cars today out there. You see them in Vegas, you see them in Washington, D.C., you see them in San Francisco. I would say full adoption is going to take some time, but right now we're at like level 3, level 4, where companies starting to monetize it. Self-driving trucks driving between Texas and Arizona. So they're here today. It's just a matter of like, when will I own one, right? That's going to pick me up or drop me off. That's going to take at least a decade, I would say.
Thank you. Susanna?
In my opinion, it will go in stages. There will always be early adopters, and then if you look at the late adopters, it takes 10 to 15 years. So I think I can agree with Radhika. It will be like after the early adopters, you add a 16 or 17 years, and then the cars will be fully adopted. And one more thing that most people have ignored in the talk about, every time I hear mothers and fathers and scientists, talk like, my kid will never have to get a driving license. They are also excited about it. But I want them to also know, are you ready for your 6-year-old to take an AV without your permission?
Not at when they're
question.
so young. And Saina, you have 30 seconds before we log off. And before I forget, everybody in the audience, please check our Women in AI networking sessions as well as the booth. Saina, your take, how long?
Yeah, I think as everybody mentioned, it's gonna be in different stages, maybe for delivery and like tracking even earlier in like a few years, but for vehicles and inside the cities, yeah, maybe 10 years. But
Awesome. On that note, thank you, awesome panelists and amazing audience with amazing questions, and have a wonderful day and look forward to your owning your own self-driving vehicle soon. Bye and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.